So, sorry fellas, I know it's been quite a while since my last video, but my entire household has been sick for the last month, really. A couple of cases of COVID, some really bad summer colds, and everybody's been down and out. So, I'm going to reassemble that secondary clutch this evening and show some of the guys who have never had one apart or don't know how they work, how easily they are to tinker on. So, after giving everything a good bath, I didn't show car clean it, but I did give everything a good cleaning. Try to get, whoever had it apart last time looked like they used some grease in there. And that's one thing that I need to emphasize is when people reassemble these clutches, people that don't know have a tendency of wanting to grease the shafts or the buttons in the secondary, and that is a big no-no. These are all oil-late bushings. They don't need greasing. The only thing that grease does inside of a clutch is attract dirt, which obviously creates abrasion and speeds up wear. So inside the clutch, do not use any grease. It's a big no-no. Like I say, Polaris built these to be assembled dry. So when you took the secondary apart and you pulled two sheaves apart, there's these shims in there. You're always going to have a big one. You'll have 1, 2, 3 little thin ones. This is to set your dimension between the two sheaves to allow for belt width. On these adjustable clutches, this is the adjuster. Whatever shim came out, and like I say, pay attention when you take it apart, but whatever shim came out, put back in there. Okay? Actually, I can tell you that I put it in there backwards because as you can see, there's a groove on here and there's the pins for the adjuster and they actually will wear on that. So I'm going to put it back like so, put the washers back in there. And like I say, the biggest thing is no grease. Sometimes when we're drag racing, I will use a dry spray lube, but that's only because I know I'm going to have the clutches apart about after every maybe 2 or 3 runs. It's going to get wiped down, cleaned. There's not going to be any time to acquire dust and dirt and crap in there. So another thing I like to point out is if you notice around the outside edge of this clutch, this pitting or marking that you see on the outside face, that is from storing the machine with the belt installed on the clutches. Ideally, when you get done riding your sled, pop the hood, pop the clutch cover, and pull the belt off of it. Obviously, I can't think of anybody that actually does that, but certainly during storage in the summertime when you're done for the season, take the belt off of it. Because otherwise, the belt, the chemical makeup of the belt and the aluminum causes, like, I think it's electrolysis, and it causes this pitting. Now, this is nothing you can feel. It's not going to do anything at this level. But if you let the sled sit for 3 or 4 years, you're actually going to be able to feel this pitting. And that's not good. So yeah, this is your outside sheave. You, like I say, put your shims back in, make sure everything's clean. Take your movable sheave, slide it down on the shaft. Now down inside, I don't know if you can see this or not, but there is a small hole right there. Goes all the way through. That is for the bottom tang of your spring to fit into. If that spring does not go into that hole, you have no torsional load on the helix. The sled will suck the belt in. It will not operate anywhere near the way that it should. So always be sure when you put the spring in to make sure that that bottom tab goes in the hole and is seated firmly. And then the same thing on your helix. You have 4 holes. 4 is up here, 1 is down here. That is for your torsional load on the secondary spring. That is one of the factors that dictates your top operating RPM and your acceleration. Number 4 is tightest. Number 1 is weakest. Typically on a trail side, you're going to want to keep it between 2 and 3. Honestly, if you find yourself having to put it in number 4 or number 1, you should get a different secondary spring. These 2 here are for fine adjustments. You can run it in those. A lot of people do. But to me, if you have to keep it so tight to get your top RPM right, you should go to a tighter secondary spring. And same thing with number 1. If you have to crank it all the way down to number 1 to get your RPMs down, then you should be in the market for a softer spring. So we'll take our helix. Now this is the part that's a little tricky. I'm going to put this in position number 2, and I'll show you this once I do it. But as you can see in there, it looks funky on camera, but you can see that tang is in the second hole. And actually, before you push the helix down in, you can actually see under the right light here that the spring is in the hole in the movable sheave also. You can see it right down in there if my finger wouldn't block the light. But trying to find the right angle here. But you can see it at the bottom. It is in the hole. So, you got your helix sitting on the shaft, your spring is in there, you know the tangs are in there correctly, then you have your small keyway. This goes in the groove of the helix and on the shaft. Now, you might be wise to take maybe just a little WD-40 or a dry spray. I've already got a little bit on this, just to keep it from rusting into the groove. So you take that, you put it in your helix, and then you grab your bottom sheave and make it so that lines up with the groove in the shaft. Now when you put this in there, always make sure that it sits slightly below this face of the helix. If it sticks up above, when you put the helix down in there and you go to put your snap ring and your washer on, you're going to fight with it, and you're going to have to struggle and then push that down into the groove after the fact, and that's no fun. So this is the trick to a Polaris secondary. You could push this helix down on there right now and put your shim in there and your snap ring, and it would look perfectly right, and there'd be a load on it, but it wouldn't be right. What you need to do, if you look down in there, the ramp side of the helix needs to be on the other side of the buttons in the next, like you need to take this one and line it up with the button that's over here. So we're actually going to take this clutch and we're going to spin it until the ramp on this one is on the button that was over here. I'm actually going to spin it just a little bit more. Now there's torsional load on it. There's very little compression load on that spring right now. So what we're going to do is we'll get everything ready. And no matter what, something's not going to be ready because that's just how it works. And if you're good, you can get your snap ring pliers to stand up in the snap ring, but probably not going to work today. So now that we have that loaded torsionally, we take it and we push the helix down onto the shaft, and it may take some forcing. Not a lot though. Don't hit it with a hammer. Now with it torsionally loaded like that, you push it down. Now that spring is trying to push that helix off, so you should always try to hold it in some manner. And then you put your shim washer on. And like I said, something always goes wrong. This is one of those instances where you're trying to do 4 hands worth of stuff with 2 hands. And then you put your snap ring on. Now this is not all the way in, and I can tell you, I need to push the helix down a little bit more. Partially snapped in there, but we're going to make sure that it's in there good before we walk away from it. So we'll take a little bit more torsion on it, try to push that helix down a little bit more. I'm actually going to put my knee on it here. So there. Now I saw when I pushed on it with that set of snap ring pliers that snap ring popped into the groove. Now you always want to make sure that is seated very firmly in the groove, because if you don't, obviously this helix could come off and basically the clutch falls apart, the belt comes down to the bottom of the sheaves, and you start smoking the belt, etc., etc., etc. And if you're a little paranoid, just take a pair of needle nose and go around and make sure your snap ring is in there. And that's basically it, really. And now, if we grab this, we can feel that there's torsional load on there, and that tells us that our spring is locked in on both ends. So if you hold the stationary sheave, you can, if that tang had popped out of the helix or the movable sheave, you would have spun it like that and it would have continued to spin. So, but now I know I said no grease inside the clutch, and I mean it, but on the shaft where it slides onto the sled, this is worth a really good cleaning, and then a very light coat of WD-40, a dry lubricant sometimes is good, pretty much anything of that nature. But that, you just don't want this shaft to freeze to the shaft on the sled. So I'll probably actually take a round brush, clean that out really good, and then coat it with something, penetrating oil of some sort, or, you know. But that's basically it. Now I did recenter this adjuster. It was set on number 1. I brought it back closer to 3. So basically all there is some pins underneath these ramps right here, and they go down and they actually press against those washers that the shims, or the washers that we put in there, and it basically sets your distance between your sheaves. As you can see at the bottom, there's a 1/16 of an inch between the sheaves, maybe. If we turn this adjuster to number 1, which would actually bring the pin up higher, it would bring the sheaves closer together. If we spun it all the way to number 5, it would bring it down to the bottom of this ramp, and it would actually physically push the ramps apart. And that's due to belt wear. So if you have a new belt, you may have to spin this up to number 5. And if you have a clapped out, worn out, shitty old belt, you spin it back to number 1. It closes up the distance between these sheaves. It allows the belt to ride up as high as it's supposed to in the sheaves, and allows the sled to perform the way that it should. I always try to set mine up so it's on number 3, so it gives you the option either way. If you happen to blow a belt, you have to put a new one on, you're allowed a little bit of clearance in either direction. But that's pretty much it, guys and girls. Just make sure everything's good and clean. Like I say, a light lube on this shaft, not too much, because it will eventually squish out on the back side, and it could find its way on the face, on the pockets of the helix, and then drain into the clutch. So don't goop it on there. A little bit is fine. So that's it for tonight, fellas. Hopefully for the guys who have never put a Polaris secondary together, this was informative. The guys that I know that are watching have done this with their eyes closed in a field at 7 o'clock at night, and it's not a big deal. So, but if you like my video, please give me a like, and if you like any of my videos, please subscribe to my channel, and we'll see what we can get into next time. Thanks.